Welcome back to the Raw Prospect Podcast. My name is Nixon. To my right, that is Michael Wein, joining me from Austin, Texas, as we always do. And tonight we are revealing our next two teams in our power ranking series. If you're new here, we do this every year where we count down from all the way from 20 all the way up to 1, previewing every single team, what their prospects are like this season, how their season went last year, how those two things compare. We're going to be going in depth on the number 18 team, Las Vegas Raiders, and number 17, Michael's Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you enjoy what we do here, make sure to subscribe and like the video. We make an episode every single week here on this podcast and over on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. We have a second channel over there. Go check that out if you're a Longhorn fan or college football fan. But before we get into the Las Vegas Raiders preview, Michael, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing all right. The start of training camp is always fun. It's filled with lots of excitement as now all 32 teams are in the early stages of team development for 2025 on the quest to a potential deep playoff run and Super Bowl run. Some teams are more optimistic than others, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, I'm doing well, aside from my baseball team. But other than that, I'm good. I'm excited for football season. We're now like 5 weeks away from the kickoff of college football season. So be sure you're tuned in to Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. And thank you to everybody who's been supporting Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports over the last 5 episodes. It is really gaining some traction, and I love to see it. Even if you fucking hate with all of your guts the Texas Longhorns, I do not care. If you watch even a little bit or tune in or comment in the comments, I will take it. And honestly, a little trash talk wouldn't be bad as well. I wouldn't mind that. So, because that's our goal. We want to build a community of people who just love talking football, whether that be college or the NFL or both. If you're passionate about both, like we are, well, you're a perfect fit here. So, with all that being said, so that I can take my mind off my baseball team for a couple hours, let's go ahead and jump right into our number 18 team in our power rankings, the Las Vegas Raiders.
Yeah, the Raiders last year went 4-13. It was a combination of Aiden O'Connell starting for them, to go along with a little bit of, was it Gardner Minshew? I can't even remember.
It was.
And honestly, after like week 5, no one paid attention to this team. They couldn't run the ball a lick. They were, struggling on the defensive side of the ball with injuries. Max Crosby went down. The bright spot of this Raiders team last year, though, was rookie tight end Brock Bowers, who we'll talk about a little bit later on. But going into this year, the Raiders have much higher expectations. They bring in Geno Smith, a veteran, at the very least, a baseline of solid to good quarterback play, from number 7, Geno Smith, obviously. And then they made a bunch of other additions as well, which we'll get into. But Michael, what's your overall thoughts on the Raiders this year, before we dive a little deeper?
Well, if I could sum up the Las Vegas Raiders, used to be, of course, the Oakland Raiders, in one word over the last half decade, it's instability from top to bottom. In the last 4 years, they've gone through 3 different leadership regimes. So this team is more accustomed to change at the top of their organization than they are to having a winning record. Because in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they have one winning season. So they hope that the most recent overhaul is going to help that. And I think if you're a Raiders fan, the most obvious, in a vacuum, simplified reason for optimism going into the 2025 season is I think that the Raiders upgraded, again, in a vacuum, at the three most important positions outside of course, general manager, which they might have upgraded too. It's yet to be seen. But I know for sure that they upgraded at quarterback, offensive coordinator, and head coach. I know for a fact that head coach is Pete Carroll, has done it before. He's got a long track record of success, both in the college game and in the NFL, has won a Super Bowl. Geno Smith, as you mentioned, at the very least, should be a floor raiser at the quarterback position, as he's been a top half of the league quarterback over the last 4 years. A much needed upgrade over the past couple of years at the quarterback position. And then they go from Luke Getsy, who didn't work out in Las Vegas, to Chip Kelly, who's now back in the NFL and should help in a variety of ways, at least we think. So if you're a Raiders fan, that's the most simple, obvious reason for optimism. You upgraded at head coach, you upgraded at quarterback, and you probably most likely upgraded at offensive coordinator. And you may have even upgraded at general manager with John Spytek. So that's kind of the baseline reason for optimism going into 2025 for the Raiders.
Yeah, exactly. And I generally think that Tom Brady's influence in this organization is a good thing for them long term,
I
because
agree.
everything that dude touches is golden when it comes to football. So
Yeah, if you've got Tom Brady as a part of your organization, that can't be a bad thing.
yeah,
Especially when
definitely
you're an organization that has had constant turnover over the last decade, and I think has made the playoffs once in the last half decade. That was in 2021 when they won 10 games. I don't even remember who was their
yeah.
quarterback then. Do
It
you?
was it was Derek Carr, and they
Derek
fired
Carr.
their coach midseason. That was the John Gruden season where they hired
Yep.
Rich Bisaccia,
Yep. I
and
remember that
then
now.
fired him. They fired a coach twice that year and made the
Yeah.
playoffs.
From John Gruden to Rich Bisaccia to Antonio Pierce to now Pete
Wait, to
Carroll.
Josh McDaniels, then to
Josh
Antonio
McDaniels.
Pierce. Oh
Then
my
Antonio Pierce. So it's been instability. That's what it's been. Now they're finally, at least in this season, trying to find some organizational stability. And I think they've done a pretty good job of that. So let's get into their offseason. We go through our top 3 favorite offseason additions for the Raiders. So I'll go ahead and start us off. My number 3, this might be a little bit of an underrated one to some people, but I went with Jack Besh, the physical wide receiver from TCU. I believe is where he was drafted out of. Correct? Let me just make sure I have that
Yeah,
right.
TCU. Yep, that's correct.
TCU. This addition through the draft in the second round, I think, adds some much needed depth to their receiving corps. They need someone outside of just Jacoby Myers to emerge in that receiver corps to help Geno Smith. I think he's also, you mentioned in the opening that the Raiders could not run the ball last season, and we'll dive a little bit more into that later when we get into X factors. Besh is a physical wide receiver that excels in run blocking. I think he's going to help them in that aspect. Now, he's not really a run after catch, create explosive plays after the catch kind of player, but he's a reliable target. I think he'll help this receiver room, and he's going to be counted on right away. I really believe that. So I like the Jack Besh addition in the second round. That was my third favorite. What about you?
Yeah, I had Jack Besh at number 3 also. And if you watched the Senior Bowl, you already know who he is because he had an amazing week at the Senior Bowl. And in all honesty, if this was a little bit of a weaker wide receiver class, there's a chance that he's a first round pick in some years. Like, I think he's that good. He doesn't jump off the screen in terms of physical abilities, but I think he has some of the best hands in this draft, and he also just has that kind of my ball bitch mentality, for lack of a better term. Just he has that dog mentality that's just going to go up and get the football if it's a 50-50 ball. Like you feel good about him coming down with those tough catches. And this Raiders team really needs that because they're going to be relying on him, Jacoby Myers, and then fourth round pick Dante Thornton Jr. to go along with, of course, Trey Tucker. And then I do want to shout out Colin Johnson, former Longhorn, hanging around the league as well. He might make this roster. So not a not a horrible receiving core, but a little bit unproven in terms of depth.
Yeah, number 2 for me was Ashton Genty. You could put him at 1 if you want to. I totally get it. But just like we all know what Ashton Genty was at Boise State, potentially another generational prospect at the running back position. Had over 100 yards rushing in every single game last year, albeit, I mean, it was against G5 competition, but that's still at any level of football really, really impressive. What you like about Genty is just like strength is his power. That's going to come in handy behind an inconsistent offensive line. He broke tackles at an incredible rate last year. Actually averaged 2.9 yards per carry when contacted behind the line of scrimmage last year, which is incredible. No college running back has averaged more yards when contacted behind the line of scrimmage over the last 10 years in the history of college football, over the last decade. So you love that. I think he'll help an offensive line, which, by the way, did show steady improvement throughout last season. You hope that can continue. And then number 1 for me was Geno Smith. If you don't have a quarterback in today's NFL, you don't stand a chance. And at least for Geno Smith, as we've mentioned already a couple times, and we don't need to beat a dead horse, he ranks 6 in the NFL for most wins since becoming the Seahawks starter back in 2022. And he's been amongst the league's most accurate passers in that time as well. He can make throws to all levels of the football field. Again, might not be a ceiling raiser, but definitely a floor raiser at that position. So those are my 3 favorites. Does yours match, or do you have something different?
No, we do match. I had Ashton Genty at number 2, and then I paired up Geno Smith and Pete Carroll kind of as one tandem as my number 1 favorite thing they did in the offseason, just because Pete Carroll was the one that got the most out of Geno in his time in Seattle. And I know Pete Carroll is a defensive coach, but there's no mistaking the fact that, Pete Carroll's kind of uplifting style definitely makes a difference in not only what the defense does, but also the offense. He has his fingers in like everything that a football team does. So I think Pete Carroll can continue to get the most out of Geno. I think that's a really smart move to pair those two together, and it also buys them time in terms of trying to find their young quarterback in say 3 or 4 years rather than having to look for that guy immediately.
Yeah. Just some additional context. You mentioned it. Carroll was able to kind of revive what was turning into a dormant career for Geno Smith. His days with the Jets were mostly dark and a failure. And not all of that blame, by the way, falls on Geno Smith, but both parties had their hands in that.
Yeah.
And Carroll was able to revive him. 53 games for Seattle. He completed almost 69% of his passes, which is 4th in the NFL since 2021. So he's accurate. He can make throws to all levels of the football field. And he'll win you, I think, a baseline minimum amount of games. Like, I don't think, unless you're just ravaged by injuries and this is a total disaster, that this is going to be a 4-win team again, like it was last year with Geno Smith and Pete Carroll. They are floor raisers at the very least. And that's reason for optimism. It's just you're in a super tough division. I think all 3 teams in their division could be playoff teams. You can certainly make a really strong argument for all 3 to be Super Bowl contenders if you really wanted to. So for the Raiders, it's about overcoming their division, and then just being consistent on both sides of the ball week to week. But let's get into our X factors. What is your number one X factor? It can be a coach, it can be a player, it can be a, a part of the game. What is the number one thing for the Raiders to achieve what they want to achieve in 2025?
My number one X factor for the Raiders is that entirety of that defensive line. They obviously just cut Christian Wilkins, their big 2023 free agent signing. They didn't really wait. No, that was last year. That was a 2024 free agent signing. Excuse me. But they just cut him. That foot injury became a lot more concerning than they had originally thought. And now they're looking at a lot less depth on the interior. So it's going to be a lot more pressure on those edge guys to really perform. It's going to be on Max Crosby and their free agent re-signing. What is his name? Malcolm Coons, and then of course their number 7 overall pick from a couple years ago, Tyree Wilson, to kind of pick up the slack and make those big plays in the backfield on early downs.
Yeah, I think there are two big X factors here. You can put one at 1 and the other at 2, or vice versa. I don't think it really matters all that much. But when you look at the Raiders' defensive front last year, and this is with Christian Wilkins, although he did miss 5 games with that foot injury, it was a Jones fracture, and that caused a disagreement between the organization and Wilkins and his agent on whether or not he should get surgery. And that's the reason for their mutual parting of ways, is that Wilkins didn't want to get surgery. The organization wanted him to get surgery. That's kind of how I understand it. But without him, you this defensive front, both in rushing the quarterback, because they did not consistently pressure the quarterback last year. They were 26 in pressure rate, 21st in the NFL with 38 sacks. Now, albeit they still have Max Crosby, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. But they did not consistently generate enough pressure on opposing quarterbacks. And without Christian Wilkins, are they going to be able to maintain at least being league average against the run? Because that's about where they were last year. They were 16th in yards per carry allowed to running backs. They were 13th in yards before contact allowed to running backs. So it's going to be up to the guys you mentioned, and some veterans that they added, like Fotu and Tonka Hemingway, who they drafted in the 4th round, along with Malcolm Kuntz, to elevate their level of play in order to maintain at least being middle of the pack in that area and elevating to create more consistent pressure on the quarterback. And then the other obvious X factor is the running game has to be better. It just does. And you can throw a bunch of different people into this equation. How are they going to improve? Well, Chip Kelly is known for having a very good running scheme and a running game that works at both levels of football. One of the reasons Ohio State brought him in was for the running game, and we obviously saw how good it was last year. But they were one of the worst rushing units in the NFL last year, and you mentioned it. But going from Alexander Mattison to Ashton Jeanty and Raheem Mostert, along with the addition of Chip Kelly, would improve that. It just has to get better. They have to help out a quarterback who, albeit having a baseline, minimum level of top 15, even at times top 10 level of quarterback play throughout the last half decade, and Geno Smith is going to be 35 eventually at some point during the season. So you have to help him out with some sort of consistent running game that's at least middle of the pack. And so those are the two main things for me for the Raiders this year.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing on the run defense part of it. They lost Robert Spillane to the Patriots, and that's going to be a big factor also because they brought in kind of veteran stopgap type of players to fill in that role at linebacker. And Robert Spillane, he was at a borderline all pro level last year, like legitimately like a top 10 level linebacker. So that's a big loss as well in terms of the run defense. But yeah, I think the Chip Kelly portion of this is definitely interesting. And then I also like that they kept Patrick Graham on as defensive coordinator. They were able to keep him around despite changing regimes. I think that was significant. And it's going to be interesting to see how Pete Carroll's kind of uh, cover three bail type of scheme like kind of meshes in with Patrick Graham's kind of more aggressive Belichickian style of defense.
Yeah. I think another X factor, and you kind of pointed to this, is I think the veterans that they added on defense, they added 4 of them. They went out and got Landon Roberts, who, by the way, is a very good run stopping linebacker.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
he gives you a baseline level of a linebacker that's very good in reading and reacting to different run schemes. But over the last couple of years, he was playing behind one of the best defensive fronts in football in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it makes it harder on a linebacker to do his job if he's playing behind a subpar group up front. That's why it makes it even more important for guys like Tonka Hemingway and Malcolm Kuntz to not only stay healthy, but to play well, to play at a baseline, like minimum level of competence in stopping the run. Because if they're not stopping the run, running backs are getting to the second level. That puts way too much pressure on a Landon Roberts. As good as he is in the run game, if running backs are getting to the second level without much resistance, it's just going to be too much for him and Devin White. I actually kind of like that tandem of linebackers, but it's just going to be too much, which puts even more pressure on. That's why you'd like to have a guy like Christian Wilkins. And
Right.
then Jeremy Chin and Eric Stokes, they added both those guys to the secondary, both on short-term deals. So if it doesn't work out, they're giving themselves some flexibility there. But I mean, both have had good stretches of football so far in their careers. Those guys are going to need to step up in that secondary because that secondary, while it didn't show improvement in some areas, still needs to continue to get better. So,
Yeah, and they're young in the
yeah,
secondary for sure. So those two veterans are going to play a big part for sure.
absolutely. So let's talk ceiling, floor, and most likely outcome for the Raiders. Where do you kind of sit right now, given that everything we talked about, their offseason, the head coach, quarterback, GM additions, their overall roster? What is their floor in 2025? Let's start there.
Um, yeah, I think the floor would probably at around 6 or 7 wins, maybe 5. I'd struggle to go any lower than that though.
Mhm.
I think this defense is going to at least be average because I like the coaching staff with Pete Carroll and Patrick Graham. I think those are two high level defensive minds that'll be able to solve problems. I think it'll ultimately be a uh, opponent dependent defense, for a lack of a better term, just because the teams that are going to be able to run the football at a high level are going to gash them a little bit. But the teams that don't, they're going to get into long third downs, and that pass rush is going to be able to tee off with Malcolm Coons and Max Crosby. So I think I'm not worried about them offensively too much. I think they're going to put up points, and defensively, they're going to be kind of matchup dependent and opportunistic. So I see their floor at around 6 or 7 wins, and I think their ceiling goes up to, if a few things here or there go right, maybe they make a trade for a D tackle or they pick up a veteran somehow. Um, maybe they get to 10, 11. But it would be tough given their division.
Yeah, I think right now their over under is 6.5. Personally, I would lean as long as everyone's healthy. I think they can get to 7 wins. Because I think they just had so many massive upgrades at the most important positions. And I think their run game is going to improve. I'd set their floor maybe at 6 if things really go wrong. I don't really see it going lower than that though. Um, and then I think their ceiling's right around 10 in a wild card team. Just their division's so tough. Like if you're a Raiders fan, would you take 2-4 in your division?
Probably, yeah. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they fare at home because it doesn't seem like they've fared well again, like within their division at their home stadium, which is strange.
I'd set it right around. I think most likely. What's the okay? So we've kind of established that. What's most likely for Raiders? Is it somewhere in between that? Probably 8 or
Yeah,
9.
yeah. I think I would put them squarely like right around 8 or 9 wins. And I think they're going to be a really solid football team, and they're going to be a pain in the ass to play. Like I really do think that, and um, they're gonna cause some headaches for some teams that don't want to stop the run. Like I see the Cowboys on the schedule. The Cowboys don't like stopping the run. I see, of course, um, the Browns, the Bengals. There's some teams on this schedule that they're gonna kind of pound it straight up their throat. Pause.
Yeah, I I don't disagree with you. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Um, so let's go ahead and move on to the number 17 team in the power rankings, the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah.
If you're new here, I am a diehard Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So let's go ahead and dive in to one of the more interesting uh, organizations right now in the league, given their position at quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger retired. Um, the what you do. Here's what I'll say to kick us off. They have one of the most impressive streaks in the NFL. It is really hard to maintain the level of consistency that the Pittsburgh Steelers have been able to maintain in the 18 years that Mike Tomlin has now been the head coach going into year 19. It just is. Like no other team has been able to come close. The only other team to come close to what the Steelers have done in the last 2 decades in terms of that model of consistency, like having winning records every season, was the Patriots Belichick uh, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady dynasty. Like that's about it. So it is, in a way, very impressive to do what they've done, but it's getting old. And for Steelers fans, for a franchise that used to hold themselves to a standard, I think they still pretend to do that, but used to believe that we should be Super Bowl contenders every single year. And they actually lived in a time about 10, 15 years ago where that was the case, where they were consistently in AFC championship games, winning playoff games every single year, getting to the Super Bowl actually 2 times in 3 years and 3 times in about 7 years. We did live in that time in like the mid 2000s to early 2010s. But since Ben retired, it's been the 8, 9, 10 wins, rinse and repeat, and losing the playoffs. No playoff wins since 2016. That's unacceptable in this organization, no matter what you think the standard is now. Even if it's not competing for a Super Bowl any longer, maybe every year like it used to be or should be in Pittsburgh, no playoff wins in 9 years is ridiculous. So that's kind of where we sit. Like the model of consistency that this organization has been able to display in the regular season in the NFL, given all the variables it takes to win in the NFL, is ridiculously good to a certain extent. But when you combine it with no postseason success in just about a decade, it gets old. It fans are pissed and they want none of it anymore. Whether that be actually trying to make the moves to win more in the postseason and try to compete for a Super Bowl, or go the other direction. Like, I can tell you, Pulse of Steelers Nation is pick one or the other. And the Steelers have picked, we'll see if it works or not, but they have picked to try to continue to elevate to something beyond what they've been over the last 5 years, which has since been retired, which is probably make the playoffs, be good enough to make the playoffs, but totally shit their pants down the stretch and get beat by 30 by the Chiefs, the Ravens, or the Bills in the wild card round.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of key points there. For one, I think the Steelers organization, it's at a spot where they need to modernize and they need to kind of decide whether Mike Tomlin is going to be the face of that. And we've already kind of seen it with some of their, more aggressive moves in free agency over the last couple of years. They're trying to do that. They're making efforts to go in that direction. So I think it's a crossroads, and I think this is the year where it's gonna go one way or the other. Where I think after next year, it's gonna be what if they win a playoff game, they'll continue with Mike Tomlin, and if they don't, then I'm not sure if he'll be their head coach. And I know he just signed an extension, and I know a lot of Steelers fans will disagree with that, and you might even disagree with that. But I think this is a very big year for the Steelers organization, given the I guess extra assets they threw into putting this iteration of the Steelers together, with in terms of draft picks and everything of that nature, paying DK Metcalf, all of those things. So this is a very big season for the Steelers.
I would agree. And with that, like there were so there were so many the most, I can say this for a fact, this was the craziest offseason in terms of aggressive moves in free agency and trades that I've ever seen as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. And it's not particularly close. Part of that is Omar Khan, who's doing his best to put the chips on the table while there's still a window with what should be a top 10 level defense and some good players, good young promising players on offense. Like, it should be a team that can win a playoff game in theory, but you have a 41-year-old quarterback. The offensive line super inconsistent. There are just so many other factors there. Let's get into offseason additions, because it was a super active offseason, both in terms of additions and subtractions. When Mike Tomlin, after losing to the Ravens in the wild card round last year, said there are going to be significant changes, he was right. It wasn't what Steelers fans, I think, wanted, just in terms of like they wanted some coaching staff turnover. Some even wanted Tomlin's head because it's getting old. But the Steelers are the only team in the NFL to replace their leading passer, their leading rusher, and their leading receiver this year. And so they were pretty active, and they're still active. Like, as of a couple weeks ago, they went out and they traded for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. So my third favorite offseason addition comes through the draft, and I've been on this guy since the draft process started, especially for this particular team and this particular scheme with Arthur Smith, and that's Caleb Johnson. Because they needed a replacement for Najee Harris, who likes to play with fireworks, but that's another story for another day. He brings a similar kind of skill set, I guess you could say, to Najee. But from what I've seen so far in training camp, just the physical runner, the explosiveness, running the same kind of scheme at Iowa fits perfectly into kind of this outside zone scheme that Arthur Smith wants to run as a nice complement to Jalen Warren as the other back. 67% of his carries last year went outside the tackles. That's what Arthur Smith wants to do. He can make some big plays. We saw that at Iowa. He was one of their only explosive playmakers in that offense, for an offense that sometimes you bleed out watching if you're a college football fan. And from what I've seen, just the explosiveness in training camp, I know it's only in shorts and shells, but I really like him, and I'm going to continue to like him. I've been on the train since the beginning, so I might as well stick to my guns. He was my third favorite addition, just because I think how he would fit into the scheme, and because of what he'll bring to the team as kind of a different sort of complement to Jalen Warren. But I'm interested to hear your lists. Who do you have at number 3?
At number 3, I had Jalen Ramsey. I really like what he's going to bring to the secondary, and I know you lose Minkah Fitzpatrick in the process, who was a key cog within this defense for a long time, but throwing Jalen Ramsey in at this stage in his career at slot corner, I think is a big upgrade. He still is very active against the run. He still has enough speed to be able to, and obviously understanding of routes to be able to cover in open space and be able to do all those things that they're going to need him to do. And I think he really ties this defense together really well. I honestly think, and we're going to get into this a little bit in deeper detail later, but this defense has a chance to be the best defense in the NFL if things come together.
Yeah, I had Jalen Ramsey at number 2 because of his versatility. I think the versatility he's going to bring to this secondary is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, you in the process of acquiring Jalen Ramsey and, of course, Jonnu Smith, you had to part ways with Minkah Fitzpatrick, who has been a key cog not only in this defense for about 6 years, in his 6 years in Pittsburgh, and at one point was the best safety in the NFL in terms of generating game-changing plays, like turnovers. Hasn't quite been that the last 2 years, which had some fans kind of questioning, is he quite the same player? But I still think he's got a lot of good football in him, and I think we'll see that in Miami, although he's going to want to get paid. And I think one of the reasons they made that move is they're still going to have the highest paid defense in the NFL by kind of a wide margin because they paid DJ Watt. They're paying a lot of players on this defense, including Jalen Ramsey. Cam Hayward's still on the team. He cost a lot because he still played at an all-pro level last year at the age of 36, I think. Just incredible what that guy's been able to do. They have Alex Highsmith, who they've paid. There are a lot of players on this defense that they've had to pay. Patrick Queen. So it's the highest paid defense in the league, and they can't pay everybody. And if they were picking and choosing between TJ Watt and a safety, they were, of course, going to pick TJ Watt. So I wish the best of luck to Minkah, but back to Jalen Ramsey. He can play slot corner, he can play outside corner, and he can play safety.
Yep.
I think you're going to see a lot of him at slot corner and at safety in this defense. I don't know how much he'll be at outside corner, but they might put him out there too. Who knows? It just depends on Joey Porter Jr. Will definitely be on one side. And then it might be a Darius Slay on the other. We'll see. I don't know who will kind of win that job. Probably Darius Slay and then Jalen Ramsey in the slot. I do like how this secondary is coming together and how it has looked so far in the first couple of days of training camp. So Jalen Ramsey was my second favorite. And then I went back and forth on my first favorite addition. And it's not Aaron Rodgers, by the way. I think you could go a number of different ways. DK Metcalf could be here if you wanted it to be him. but I just love, and maybe this is kind of like the Steeler fan in me. Um, just an organization that prides itself on having nasty defensive fronts year in and year out.
Yeah.
Derek Harmon was my favorite offseason addition, the first round pick out of Oregon. Going into the draft, there was a lot of speculation like, what are the Steelers going to do at 21? Could they pick a quarterback? Could they pick a receiver? Could it be another position? And of course, what do? They draft a defensive lineman for a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a damn good player, and he showed that both at Michigan State and at Oregon. He's got remarkably similar traits to Cam Hayward, who's 36, still playing at a high level, but there's going to come a time when he's not anymore. And it's not a shot at Cam Hayward. That's just how football works. He's got 2 years remaining on his contract, but they needed to find the heir apparent to Cam Hayward. And that's another reason I like it. He became even more of my favorite on draft night, a life-changing night for him in a multitude of ways. But right after he was drafted, he did actually, very unfortunately, lose his mom. So, like, I feel for Derek Harmon. I really like him as a player. The Steelers need some youth in that defensive line room, and I think they have a good amount of it now with Keanu Benton and Derek Harmon and Y.A. Black, who they drafted later on in the draft. And that's good. I like that. So those are my 3 favorite additions this offseason.
Yeah, dude, we're on the exact same tune in terms of that because I had DK Metcalf at number 2 and Derek Harmon at number 1 also
Okay.
because I think um, this dude has a chance to be a star. And when you look at TJ Watt entering the latter half of his career, he's entering the stage. He's 31 years old. He's running out of years to compete for a Super Bowl, and I think Derek Harmon is going to be a key part in terms of a running mate, putting him on the same side of the line as TJ Watt. I think that's something that Steelers fans can get very excited about. I just a little anecdote here. Brett Coleman was at the Oregon Pro Day, and from what he said about Derek Harmon, it was basically like all eyes were on him from the moment that pro day started. Like he was just the leader of that entire team, essentially, just extremely vocal, extremely eye popping in terms of just what he was able to do in the drills in that workout. Um, from everything I hear about him, I believe in this kid like wholeheartedly, and that's dangerous, obviously, for a guy that hasn't played a snap of NFL football. But it's been a while since I've bought into a first round pick that wasn't a Cowboy, and it's been a while. It's been a good while.
Yeah. And then Metcalf, like, of course, you throw him in there too. You it didn't last long with both Metcalf and Pickens on the roster, but you get your number 1 wide receiver. And the thing that I like, I guess, in a way, is they're putting their chips on the table at the very least. And we haven't seen that to a full extent. It's kind of been 1 foot in, 1 foot out. We'll kind of straggle the line of trying to be competitive and build for the future at the same time. And I still think they're trying to do that. They're trying to win now and build for the future. And it's made for kind of this weird just trajectory as a franchise. But like Metcalf, I think he's a good player. He's explosive. I don't know if, like, what if, let me ask you this, and then we can move on to X factors just really quick. 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, if the Steelers had an offseason where, like, take yourself back to, say, 2021 or 2020. If the Steelers had an offseason where they acquired Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, I don't know if this would have happened back then, but Aaron Rodgers, DK Metcalf, Jalen Ramsey, Darius Slay, Jonnu Smith, their draft picks. Like, what are we talking about this team being back then? I don't know. It would be interesting to see. But now all those players are older, which is, of course, a concern. But at least they're putting their chips on the table in a way, I guess.
Yeah, they
Um,
definitely are, and they're kicking the can down the road in terms of money too. Like
yeah.
they've kind of been able to finagle the system kind of in a similar way to the Saints in terms of finding a way to put void years in contracts and all those types of things. So, like I said in the open for the Steelers, man, like this is a huge year for this organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the last decade, 9 quarterbacks have started a game for the Steelers. Um, Roethlisberger, Landry Jones, Michael Vick, Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett, Justin Fields, and Russell Wilson. Add Aaron Rodgers to the list. I never thought I would be saying that kind of list out loud as a Steelers fan. But here we are. Let's get into X factors. What is your number one X factor for Pittsburgh in 2025?
Well, I think it's just got to be the chemistry between Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf. Um, One thing we know about Rodgers is he loves to throw those back shoulder down the sideline type of plays. And when he first got paired up with Garrett Wilson, I was someone that was very excited about that pairing, and it never meshed the way it should have. So the question mark for me with this pairing of Rodgers and Metcalf is, can they get on the same page, and how quickly can that happen? And I think ultimately they will eventually, be very productive regardless. But on those key third downs, Rodgers needs that guy that can um, think the way he thinks. Because Rodgers likes a very stationary offense. He doesn't like a whole lot of motion. He wants to be able to see the picture pre-snap and, say what you want about that. But with that, you need wide receivers that can just go up and just straight up win.
Is it fair to say that he's the polar opposite of Russell Wilson in a way? And then, like, he's very much reliant on timing, whereas Russell Wilson is like just run around and try to find
Yeah.
someone deep.
Yeah.
That's kind of what the offense was last year. It was try to run the football on first, maybe second down, and then throw it up to Pickens. And it got them to 10-3, but then it collapsed. Wilson's play collapsed. The offensive line was showing some nice signs, and they collapsed. The defense was banged up, and that led to them losing the last 5 games of the season, including the wild card game. My number one, even though I do agree with you, like that's going to be important, but none of that matters if the offensive line's terrible.
Yeah.
And specifically, my X factor is going to be the tackles, both left tackle and right tackle. Because if you're asking me, I actually do kind of like the interior of this line.
The interior is great. Yeah.
Siamalu, it's all going to depend on health for him because he is a veteran. He's getting older. He's going into year 10. But he's good. He's a good player. Frazier, I think, could be a top 5, top 3 center in the league by the end of this year. I don't think that's exaggerating at all. I think he's that good. I think he's the centerpiece of this offensive line over the next 5 to 10 years. And then Mason McCormick, like, I think there's real opportunity for growth there. He's a really nasty football player, kind of fits the style they want to run. He showed good signs last year, had his struggles as a rookie, but if he improves and you've got Frazier and Siamalu, interior set. But it comes down to Broderick Jones, who's been like a model of inconsistency from play to play, drive to drive, game to game throughout his 2 years in the NFL so far. And it's not all entirely his fault because he's been going back and forth between left and right tackle because of need in a way. He hasn't really been able to stay at one spot, his natural spot, which I do think is left tackle. This year he will be there because Dan Moore is gone. and Valtanu, their number one draft pick from last year, is back. Those two guys need to be baseline minimal, like I think around league average tackles this year, because you got a 41-year-old quarterback, eventually going to be 42 at some point, back there, who's not very mobile, who's less than 2 years removed from an Achilles injury. And if there's pressure from the edge, it's not going to be good for Pittsburgh. So like Broderick Jones, even more than I think Faltanu, coming off the injury, needs to be good. And I still think the Steelers, if they were really all in on this year, at some point during training camp, need to go out and find a veteran swing tackle that can step in and give you like a baseline level of play if one of these guys is a disaster. And that's kind of my biggest worry right now with this team is offensive line depth and the tackle position. They're young players. They're talented young players, we think. Both Faltanu, who I'm really excited about to see what he can do. And then Jones, I think, is talented. There's a reason I think they took him in the first round, but both those guys got to step up. And then number two, offensively, even more so than, I guess, like the connection between Rodgers and Metcalf, Roman Wilson and or Calvin Austin needs to emerge at somewhat to be a reliable kind of number two receiver. Now, in my opinion, the Steelers are going to run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel. In fact, they might run the most 12 and 13 personnel in the league this year with how deep their tight end room is now, with acquiring a guy like Jonnu Smith, who's coming off a career year, still having Pat Freiermuth and having Darnell Washington. Like, they're just going to run a lot of heavy personnel. And when it comes down to it at the end of the season, it's likely going to be one of those guys is like maybe the leading pass catcher next to Metcalf. But if one of those guys is going to emerge, it would help out this offense so much to have like a number two receiver that can be counted on. I have more confidence that's going to be Calvin Austin than I do it's going to be Roman Wilson, who missed all last year with some sort of hamstring injury. I'm not super confident that he's going to be the guy, but I hope he can find a role. But like Calvin Austin, there's a lot of pressure on that dude because it can't just be Metcalf and some tight ends, because that's basically what it was last year.
Yeah.
I think one of those guys needs to step up. And I'm not asking you to be a Pro Bowler. I'm not even asking you to, have a 1,000-yard season or even close to that. But there's got to be some level of competence at that number two receiver spot, because over the last couple of years, it's been Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin and just a bunch of
Yeah.
So ever since Deontay Johnson left, like that, it's been a struggle to find that number two guy. So I'm looking at that in training camp heavily to see what those two guys are doing. But yeah, those are kind of like the offensive line and that battle. And of course, like Rodgers. What is Aaron Rodgers right now? I think he still can obviously sling it at a pretty high level still, but he's 41. There are concerns with that. He didn't play all that great, hasn't played all that great last year, past couple years. So, like, what level of play will he give Pittsburgh? That's a big X factor as well. I think a lot of the X factors are on offense. On defense, it's just like the veterans got to stay healthy. And as long as they stay healthy, I think at the minimum, it's going to be a top 10 level defense.
Yeah, exactly. And like for Aaron Rodgers, this started all the way back in his last year with Green Bay. Like if you remember, that was the year they go, they start off the season rough and then they go on that late year run like Aaron Rodgers teams tend to do. They get up to, 8-9 or I think it was 8-8 at the time. They play Detroit in Detroit,
Mm-hmm.
and Detroit beats them at Lambeau to kick them out of the playoffs
Yeah.
or keep them from making the playoffs. So um, it started from there, and it seems like the inconsistency has kind of grown from that season. Obviously, with the Jets being the Jets, I'm gonna give some benefit of the doubt to Aaron just because the Jets organization is what it is, and I know that the owner had his fingers kind of meddling in with how that culture actually was, and that culture wasn't great. So yeah, I think here in Pittsburgh, he at least has that structure and that stability from an organizational standpoint. So I think it could go well.
Yeah. Going back to the offensive line, which again I'll continue to stress before we get into the outlook. Um, this offensive line last year, now of course it was different arrangement of players, and that Dan Moore was at left tackle and Broderick Jones was at right tackle, and there was no Troy Fautanu, who's kind of I'll call him like an exciting unknown at this point. Um, Pittsburgh's offensive line allowed pressure in 2.5 seconds or less on 25% of dropbacks last year, which ranked 27th in the league. Not good, especially when your quarterbacks are Russell Wilson and 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Um, so, again, Broderick Jones, you allowed pressure on 7.7% of snaps in pass protection at right tackle. That was 29th out of 34 qualified players at that position. Got to be better than that. That's basically what it comes down to. Because I actually have a fair amount of confidence in this running game to a certain extent. In this offensive line, like as a run blocking offensive line, but as a pass protecting offensive line is where I have my question marks. Um, because it is a 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. So with that being said, floor, ceiling, most likely outcome. Is it once again going to be 9-8, 10-7, and a playoff berth for the Steelers, or do you see something different than that?
Well, I think it comes down to how good are they going to be in close games because they're going to be in them. Um,
Yeah.
we've seen teams that have essentially gone untouchable in their close games and ended up at 13, 14 wins like the Vikings a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't necessarily see that because that's so improbable to do, but I do think that if they have some luck in close games, I could see this team winning 11 games. Absolutely. um, I think the defense is good enough for that, and I think the running game and um, I think style of play can get there. They're gonna play Steeler football at the end of the day. This is not gonna be some high flying team that's gonna go try to put up 35 points. Like no, they're gonna
Mm-hmm.
win games 23-20, like they always do, and play Steeler football. And that's not gonna change. It's just whether or not they can go into the playoffs healthy enough to make that happen, make that playoff win finally happen.
One of the things I think is very important for this offense, for the team in 2025, they need to do a better job of opening the game on offense and being productive on their first drive or two. Because they've been one of the worst teams in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years in opening drive touchdowns. In fact, they might be the worst. Like I don't know the exact statistic, but they are one of the worst teams in scoring early in the NFL. Um, with this defense, it would help significantly if they were playing with a lead early in games and not down 7-0, not down 10-3, and having to rely on the defense over and over again to force a turnover to change the complexion of the game. Now, somehow, some way, whether it's like I don't know what it is that Mike Tomlin uses, dark arts, black magic, voodoo, perhaps all three, that this Steelers team uses to to win close games and to win games despite falling down early and not really being a good first half offensive team. In fact, one of the worst in the NFL. Some of this falls on play calling. A lot of it also falls on the players. It's everybody as a collective. Um, they got to do a better job of that because I think that would help them significantly. Because if you can allow this defense to tee off with a lead, I think you'll be in a lot better position. You'll find yourself in a lot better position to win more games and to like if you can do it in the playoffs, that would be great too. But we'll see if they can get there.
Yeah,
I
I
have
think
the
it'll go.
floor. A couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, we did an episode where we titled the episode "Why the Best Case Scenario for the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2025 is 7 wins." To a certain extent, I kind of still believe that, but that's kind of where I have their floor, like 6 or 7 wins. That's just kind of like I think will be the baseline minimum. They're gonna win games with this defense. They just are. They're gonna win a certain amount of games. I think with like just controlling games with their defense and hopefully their running game. I see about a 7-10 record as their floor, and their ceiling's probably like 11-6. Because I think they definitely could have gotten there last year if they didn't just freaking collapse and have to go through murderer's row the last 5 weeks of the season. I mean, they played the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Ravens back to back to back, all in a span of 10 days. It was just a ridiculous schedule, a ridiculous demand for a very still like challenged, offensively challenged team. It doesn't really get that much easier down the stretch this year. I mean, you got to go Buffalo, Baltimore, Miami, Detroit, Cleveland, Baltimore in the last 6 games, but that's still like on paper easier than the 2 teams that matched up in the Super Bowl and the Ravens in 10 days. So yeah, I mean, I think it's probably 11 wins. I think there's an opportunity for this team to, like last year, get off to a pretty fast start. Um, what's the most likely outcome? What do you think that is before we wrap this up? What is the most likely outcome for the Steelers? Is it making the playoffs again and likely losing, like has been the case the last 5 years plus? Or is it maybe this time missing out on the playoffs just because the AFC's super deep? Like, where do you see that falling for them?
Let me see when they play the Bengals because, as far as I'm concerned, in this division, second in the division is kind of up for grabs. Because I don't know what the Bengals will be sitting at in terms of where their defense is. So I think most likely scenario is probably 10 wins. I honestly
And I don't know if that
believe that.
gets.
I mean, that's
I don't
right
know if
around
that.
that range.
I don't know if that gets them in or not. It might.
Yeah.
It might be good enough, but the AFC, the depth of this conference is ridiculous. We've already talked about it at length this offseason. We don't know if these teams are going to make the playoffs because we don't. But like Patriots will be better. You would think a team like, I don't know, like what teams Tennessee will be better. Like there are these teams that have been kind of hovering around the bottom of the AFC for a while now that are going to be improved, which only makes it more kind of bunched up in the group of teams that are fighting for those last couple wild card spots. That's kind of where I see the Steelers is about 10 wins. If the veterans stay healthy, that's about where they'll fall. And hopefully they're going into the playoffs with more momentum than they've had in like the past couple of years. Because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what the Steelers fans want. They either want this team to get further than they've gotten in the playoffs the last couple of years and actually like have what they would consider to be a successful year in winning a playoff game, or they want it to go the other direction. Meaning like they're not good. they're maybe not in the playoffs, but they get a better draft pick and a quarterback draft that's going to be, we think, pretty loaded. The draft is in Pittsburgh, which creates another storyline there for a team that needs to find their future at the position desperately.
Yeah, and I'll even put another layer to it. Like I think Steelers fans just want to have some belief that if you are in a playoff game, that you can win the game. Like even if you lose that game, just
Yeah.
be in it. Just be
Yeah.
in the game in the fourth quarter
Yes.
and just have a chance.
Yes.
They've just been getting mollywopped every
Yep.
time.
That's another aspect to it for sure. Whether it's Kansas City, Buffalo, or Baltimore, that's been the case. So yeah, that's gonna wrap it up. We did go a little longer, but I expected that because we were talking about the Steelers. And quite frankly, I could do a whole nother episode talking about the Steelers. Maybe I will. I think there will be a time during training camp where I go deeper into the Steelers, and maybe Emmy does the same for the Cowboys. But that's going to do it for this episode. Just in terms of a couple quick housekeeping things, our new episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports that we just recorded this past week on Tuesday. When did we record that episode?
I think it was. I want
Days
to say
running.
it was Monday.
It was Monday. You're right about that. That's up. You want to go listen to that because we talked a lot about running backs. Derek Cooper's commitment as Texas is hot on the trail. We talked about expectations for the running back room for Texas in 2025. And we also dove a little bit into Ohio State, as that's where Texas will kick off their season. And we've got another episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports coming this week. I think those episodes will end up being posted Friday or Saturday. That's kind of what it's been the last couple of weeks. But in terms of these NFL episodes, what can people expect in terms of like our posting schedule, do you think?
I think this episode will probably be up by Wednesday. Now that I have this new job, which big announcement, by the way, I have a new job. It's 9 to 5, and it's not gonna make me extremely tired when I record. So that's gonna help me in terms of being able to edit these and get them up a little bit quicker. So I think by Wednesday this one will be up, and then I think the second one we record tonight will probably be up by, I would say, Saturday.
Yeah. And then we'll have Dit Hole. So you got no shortage of content coming for you this week. Because we intended to record this episode this past week, but with Emmy starting a new job and me being busy as well, we're just doing it on the weekend. Thank you to Restream. Thank you for not glitching or fucking us in the ass in the middle of the episode. I really greatly appreciate that. But other than that, I really enjoyed talking Steelers football. And we'll see you next time here on the Raw Prospect Football Podcast. Any parting shots? Or are we out of
Fuck
here?
Riverside.
There you go. Peace out, y'all.
Peace.
All right. How do you stop this?
It's been a while. Hey, I got it.